Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Just Law with your host Nasreen Kareem, and we have an incredible show lined up for you today. We'll be focusing on a crucial topic that many of us often overlook, such as wills and probate services, divorce, child contact, properties, litigation. Whether you're thinking about creating a will, wondering how to navigate the probate process, or if you have questions about property transactions, we've got you covered. On today's programme, we will be discussing domestic violence and mediation. Whether you're watching us live on ICRA TV Sky 739 or watching on ICRA.tv via the website, if you have any questions or need any assistance, please don't hesitate to ring our live number at 01274 214 299. I'll be more than happy to help you out. And if you prefer to share your story without being on air, that's okay too. You can get my contact details from the control room. So today I have a very good friend of mine as my first guest on my show. His name is Maz. He's a lawyer as well, and he has been specialising in mediation over the last few years. So welcome, Maz, to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for agreeing to this at such short notice as well.
Thank you very much for having me. And if all your listeners are listening to your program, they're welcome to give a call, and equally the control room will assist them with my details after the show.
Thank you, Maz. Now, last week on the show, I was talking about child contact, what happens when there's a family breakdown, what happens to the children, how you make an application to court, and then I kept stressing the point that it's such a traumatic time for children and all parties and the parents, and how relationships can even worsen, relationships between children and the family breakdown, how sometimes the absent father, who's usually the parent who's left the home, doesn't have contact, how sometimes contact can be stopped, can be prevented. So there's so many issues around just children alone in that regard. And then one of the things that we talked about was how to try to deal with things efficiently, sometimes without having to go to a lawyer. Because sometimes people don't want to see a solicitor, they don't want to talk to a solicitor, they don't want to talk to a stranger. They're worried about what the costs are going to be, they're worried about how to express themselves, whether the lawyer, the solicitor they're talking to even understands their situation. So more and more over the last few years, we've had mediators who are more active, and even the courts, the first thing the court does when you issue proceedings is ask the question, have you been to see a mediator? Have you gone to some sort of dispute resolution? And I know that's what you're an expert in.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for giving that brief introduction about myself. Just for the benefit of your guests, obviously you and I have been friends for a number of years, and mediation, I think, is something that is missing, and the community needs to be made aware of that there is an alternative by going to a third party, someone like myself, who can speak to both parties. As you know, as solicitors, one party solicitor cannot speak to both parties because there is a natural conflict of interest. So often they tell one of the parties that they will advise them, and they just hear their story, and unfortunately they're not in a position to hear the other side of the story until witness statements and various allegations, especially in divorce proceedings, have been made. And when the other party, the other spouse, reads for the very first time all the allegations are levelled against him or her, then that's the first time that they hear that there has been often domestic violence in a relationship. And that's the first time that they hear that's been communicated to them when they're reading it in a witness statement. And as you know, marriage is a form of a contract, and to break that contract, it's often you have to allege certain grounds, and one of the grounds is obviously if one of the partners is behaving unreasonably, and it's that unreasonable behaviour for the parties to break that contract when they go to court, saying that this contract needs to be broken by way of a divorce. And when people go to solicitors, they have to give reasons, and often parties refer to domestic violence, and then that's where it gets very acrimonious and it gets litigious, and people really tend to defend their sides, and it gets very long and complicated.
So do you think that's still present now? Because up until about 2 years ago, there was the default-based system where you had to allege one of the 5 grounds for divorce, and divorces were really, really acrimonious.
Yeah.
But about 2 years ago, the law changed, so nowadays a husband and wife can apply for divorce jointly, and they don't have to allege bad behaviour on the other side. So what kind of cases are you getting where you still have couples coming to you and they're asking for mediation? What kind of cases are those?
Well, essentially, as you know, but just for the benefit of your viewers, I started to practice law as early as 1996. And
you must be really old.
And I retired from the legal profession in 2018.
Because you did immigration as well at that time.
Yes, I did. But my first port of call was family law, and I did that for 3 years. So I know the kinds of the environment that you guys still operate, and we are digressing a little, but I think your question was that are members of the public aware of the recent changes in the law? And the answer is no, because they're still, as a lawyer, you're up to date with the new regime or the new rules that apply in divorces. But Joe Public are still of the view that I have to allege something bad, otherwise my wife, or generally it's always the men that come to seek advice, saying that I've been alleged to have committed violence throughout the marriage, the domestic violence, and therefore that's the reason why my wife is alleging that I cannot see my children. So people that come and use my services are still of the view that these horrible allegations have been made, and I often see that sadly some cases people are still using that as a defence mechanism to prevent the father from having access to his children.
Yeah, it's one of the things I talked about last week, that more often than not the dispute is between the parents, but children get involved and they're used as tools to weaponise. So one parent who has the child will allege some sort of domestic violence. One of the things that I said last week was as there will be allegations like that, but as long as there are no safeguarding issues, then there's no reason why contact can't take place. But that's from the point of view of a solicitor when a couple breaks down and the one parent is trying to see the other child. So from your point of view as a mediator, what is the mediator's role when you have 2 parties coming to you? So do you act for both parties, or do you act for one party, or do you just instructed by one first?
Essentially, one party approaches myself with a view of mediating rather than litigating. With mediation, I can approach the other spouse in the relationship, and if they are, it's a voluntary process, if they are willing to mediate with the other side, then they make contact with me. Both sets of conversations that I have with either party are kept confidential. I don't disclose what was said. My main objective is to get the outcome which both parties desire, and often it's about children or finances or contact or overnight stays, and as you said, that if there are any safeguarding issues or other issues, then clearly I tend not to get involved, because at a very early stage, if one party is alleging some form of violence, I don't think it's something that I get involved in. At that stage, I ask for each party to go and instruct solicitors and get legal advice. But the benefit of someone like myself is that I can get a resolution to a problem very quickly. And you've heard of diplomacy, where I can have 2 parties in other parts of the building, and I can resolve issues very quickly. So I can speak to both parties. It's cost effective. And
how much would a mediation session cost?
Mediation...
because it's not free. I don't think you can't get legal aid for this.
No. There are certain organisations, I think that there are legal aid is available to court-appointed family mediators, and that's when you've talked about the court process, that when somebody's filed for a claim in the courts, then they offer mediation. And then if it's purely a family dispute, then if that party is on low income, etc., and legal aid is available, then that's a separate process. But for myself, I as a private mediator, I resolve all sorts of disputes. It's not necessarily family disputes, but when people do come to me, then I offer them a fixed fee service, or I can charge an hourly rate. But certainly it's more cost effective than having two sets of solicitors, and people, I think, often get mistaken by the fact that, even if a legal aid is granted, that if there is any equity or if they have any assets or savings, then at some point that offset, it will be offset against, let's say, if they've got equity in a house, for that legal aid bill to be paid. And often it makes no sense that the people that are battling for sometimes very irrational reasons, that they can quite easily sit down and talk about their differences. But as you know, in family cases, that the emotions take over and people don't think logically, and whereas people like yourself might only be concerned about your client and
our client's best interest,
yes,
really.
yeah, and your client's instructions. It's not for you to second guess what they're saying or judge what they're saying. You will simply take their instructions, put it in a witness statement, and then send it to the other side.
But having said that, I have had clients who've been fighting over the animals. So whether they have a dog or a cat, they've actually been fighting over cats or dogs, and also kitchen utensils. So sometimes as a solicitor, we have to say to our clients, look, you have to look at the bigger picture. And if you're going to argue about kitchen utensils, or who's going to have the washer dryer, or who's going to have the cat or the dog, then really it is emotional, because when couples are going through a divorce, it is very emotional, very personal. So they do get dragged into that, but I suppose my job as a solicitor is to make sure, look, can you please stick to the really crucial issues, which is getting the divorce resolved, getting the financial issues resolved, getting children's matters resolved. So even though as solicitors, yes, we are acting in the best interest of our client, and yes, by the time you've come to us and we're instructed, it's going to be a bit of a long-winded battle, and costs are incurred. It could be hundreds of pounds, it could be thousands of pounds. So from my point of view, I would actually like to see mediation. And just recently, I've been doing a lot more financial matters, so financial proceedings at the end of divorce. And also with the divorce being online now through the portal, a lot of my clients have been applying for the divorce themselves, which is really good for them. And then by the time they come to see me, they've already seen a person like you. So I will have couples who will come to see me and says, right, we've sorted out the house, we've sorted out bank statements, we've sorted out pensions, and we've done that through a mediator. So somebody like you. So are these the kind of things that you would deal with as well? Yeah,
essentially I think the people that choose mediation are, I would say, both reasonable, rational human beings, and they can reason, and they're the ones that are often get across the line a lot quicker. It's the ones that drag their heels, and more often the finances are at an issue. If, let's say, in an arranged marriage type situation where family has given a dowry and there's gold involved, and that gold was sold to put down a deposit, and various other matters when they get confused, and they're not readily resolvable, because without a little bit more insight and information, and as you know, some people have had gifts of gold given to them, and they're not receipted, etc. And there isn't a proper valuation.
In our community.
Yeah, a proper valuation is carried out, but yet it is a real financial incentive for one of the parties to keep dragging their heels, because if, let's say, one of the spouses sold the gold of to put a deposit down for the house, then clearly that's one of the spouse's contribution. But that's often overlooked, predominantly by my male clients, who say that, well, I've been paying the mortgage and I'm in employment, my wife doesn't really deserve anything. And so coming back to your point, that when people do come to me, as long as they're acting rationally and can understand reason, and someone like myself who's independent of both parties, who tell them that ultimately a court favours no one and the court will do what's just and equitable, that then they start to reason and do take advice. But when you have one irrational actor, then clearly it gets very acrimonious, and then yes, you will be fighting over the family pet.
I've seen it so many times.
Yeah.
I've been doing family law for about 20 years.
Yeah.
And honestly, when I first started my career, I wanted to be a family lawyer.
Yeah.
And then when you see issues like this, which take precedence over everything else, it does become a little bit disheartening. So it's so important to try to keep your client focused, stick to the issues,
Yeah.
and just try to resolve this. And I say to my clients every single time, and somebody came into the office yesterday and said this, said that we would rather keep the money that we have for ourselves rather than paying you solicitors. And I said, well, I agree with that. You should try to resolve things between yourselves than paying us solicitors, because I'll be acting for the husband and wife, another solicitor will be acting for the other party. Those costs could be £5,000, £10,000, £15,000. Same on the other side. You could have £20,000 or £30,000 that's just being paid to the solicitors, whereas each party could have had that and bought themselves a house, a holiday, a car, given it to the children, paid school fees, whatever it is. And I really honestly don't understand sometimes why people just drag it through rather than saying, look, there's no point in paying solicitors. There's no win or lose in this.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, and you'll probably come across this as well, sometimes clients think that one's winning and the other one's got to lose. Nobody wins in a situation like this. It's either win-win for both if they can come to an agreement quickly, or it's lose-lose to both parties if they don't come to an agreement quickly.
I agree, and I think going back to the point that I made, that when two people are reasonable and they are quite happy to look at let a third party look into their relationship and certainly the breakup. With my job, I tend not to entertain the facts, because then you get dragged into taking sides. And I simply say that my job is not to diminish what you're saying. One party is equally as hurt as the other, but it's not for me to judge between who is of the guilty of the two. I just simply say to them that I have to get an agreement, and the agreement is your children, the agreement is the house, the agreement is the finances, and it's often quite easy. I have a methodical approach. Once you start to listen to one party about how bad that relationship has been, then I think you can't focus on the end goal. And the end goal is that often people overlook that they still have to have that relationship, especially where there's children, with that person who they've spent 20 or 10 or 15 years of their life. And now things have not worked out for whatever reason. They still have children and they still have to get on. But if they start to make accusations that are unfounded, then there's someone like myself as a mediator, I really cannot go and make a finding of fact, because it really matters not whether one party is guilty or the other. And this is where I think when courts get bogged down into findings of fact and hearings, and that's where they have trials, and like you said, that there is no end result unless you're the super rich and there's a few £1 million involved. But for the majority of the people that are in a situation like this, where they have a few £1,000s in savings, they have some equity in their property, or they have their car, there isn't very much of a need to start to have this animosity. But people are bitter because one feels that the other has let them down, and they're the reason why their house is no longer functioning, and they're the reason. So once they start to blame one another, it's very difficult to get through to people, because they are fixated and they want somebody to agree with them. And I think as a solicitor, you really can't disagree with them, because you're taking their instructions and you're acting in their best interest.
It's very true.
So you will write down and agree a witness statement, But then it's only when that witness statement and the contents are read out to the recipient of that witness statement that they realise, oh my word, I've been painted as this horrible monster. I have to challenge this, because if I let it go as it is, then it's as a character assassination, and then she will be led to be believed, and you know, my children will, when they grow up, will start to read this and feel that I'm a monster.
And I suppose by the time it's recorded on a witness statement, it's been filed at court, by that time you reach the point of no return, because of whatever agreement you were hoping to come to. When you start making allegations like that, and I'm not saying that they're not true, when those allegations are being made, it's very, very difficult to get both parties to come to a compromise. And it's a shame by that time, because like I said, my job is to represent my client, one person, whereas you have the benefit of being able to speak to both parties and try to get them to see sense, but in the sense that they're not wasting too much money on this, they're not wasting too much time on this, they're not dwelling on the past, they're not bringing up all the nasty things. It's just with the aim of trying to come to some sort of resolution, and I think that's really important.
I think the point that you've emphasised is that when you've done a witness statement, carried out your client's instructions, and it's filed at court, then it's a point of no return, because those allegations need to be responded to.
Yes.
And the point I was making is that I tend not to get involved as to what it is that's led to the breakup of the relationship, because then that makes my job difficult, because I have to remain impartial and objective at the same time. And if I start to hear one person's story, then I'm inclined to favour that person, or there's some bias. So therefore, I have no interest in just listening to the client and the cause of the argument. My job is to resolve the dispute.
Right, hold that thought. We hope you're enjoying the show so far. We're going to be taking a break soon, so don't go anywhere. Grab a drink, you as well, stretch your legs.
Thank you.
And we will be back in just a few minutes, and we're going to talk about the role of mediation in legal proceedings.